The silence finally became mine. After 15 years breathing in the smoke and chaos of São Paulo, I moved to this gated community on the outskirts of the city. A 2-story house with a back deck. My new beginning at 38. The divorce papers were still hot off the press when I signed the contract for this place. Maybe it was impulsive, but I needed a space that was all mine, where I could sort out my thoughts without being haunted by echoes of past arguments. What really sold me on this house was the back deck, and most of all the hot tub set up under a small pergola. I remember the realtor saying that the previous owner barely used it. A waste, he said. To me, it was the opposite. Every night, after hours spent designing automation systems in the office, that hot tub became my refuge. My routine quickly fell into place. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., work remotely until late, and then around 10 p.m. I'd turn off my phone and sink into that warm water, watching the stars through the pergola slats as the jets massaged my tense back. That's when I finally breathed. The neighbors seemed to respect my privacy, waving from afar as they mowed the lawn or walked their dogs. It was exactly what I was looking for. Close enough so I wouldn't feel utterly isolated, but far enough to keep my solitude intact. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to get more stories like this. 3 weeks after my move, while I was unpacking some boxes in the garage, I noticed a woman standing right in the middle of my driveway. She had short brown hair, looked about 45, and was holding a basket covered with a dish towel. "You must be Nathan. I'm Diane Reynolds. I live 2 houses down," she said, vaguely pointing north while smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I brought some brownies to welcome you." I thanked her, though I would have preferred a heads up before the visit. I was about to say goodbye when she practically invaded my garage, checking out the still-closed boxes. "So, are you single? Divorced? I noticed you're not wearing a ring." Her eyes roamed over me from head to toe, a bit intrusive. The house had been empty for so long that we were all curious about who would buy it. "Yeah, I'm recently divorced," I replied curtly, crossing my arms. "I'm really looking for some peace." I'm sorry." She didn't seem too apologetic. "I lost my husband too, so I get the loneliness. By the way, I saw you've got this amazing hot tub. You should totally host a little get-together. The neighbors would love to meet you." Before I could politely decline, she was already walking along the side of the house toward the back. "Diane," I called after her with a hint of irritation. "I'd prefer if you didn't show up at the back without a heads up." She stopped, turning around with an unreadable expression. "Sure, sorry for the intrusion. I'm just trying to be friendly. Around here, we're like one big family." As she left, I felt something off in her gaze, a mix of interest and disappointment that left me uneasy for the rest of the day. 2 nights later, when I got home late from work, I noticed something different about the hot tub. The cover was slightly askew, not exactly how I had left it that morning. At first, I thought the strong afternoon wind was to blame. The next night, I found something more definitive. A lipstick mark on the edge of the hot tub. Small, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably fresh. I examined every inch of the area. The side gate that accessed the deck didn't show any signs of forced entry, but I did notice some subtle marks on its lock. Over the following 2 weeks, more clues piled up. A wet towel I hadn't used, foam residue from a soap that wasn't mine, and even a small earring near the hot tub. The feeling of invasion grew each day, turning my sanctuary into a source of anxiety. I began obsessively checking every window and door before bed. I started photographing everything as I left, cover on the tub, towels, cleaning products, to compare when I returned. On a Thursday, after noticing the water smelled different again, I decided to set up surveillance. I discreetly installed a small camera aimed at the hot tub, connected to my phone. If someone was invading my property, I'd know exactly who it was. On the 3rd night of monitoring, around 1 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I jumped up quickly, heart pounding, and looked at the screen. The night vision clearly showed a female figure sliding into my hot tub. Diane. I quickly threw on a hoodie and crept down the stairs without turning on any lights. When I opened the back door, I saw her completely at ease, eyes closed, immersed in the bubbling water. My hot tub, my property. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, turning on the external lights. Diane slowly opened her eyes, showing no sign of surprise or embarrassment. She smiled, as if we had a prearranged coffee date. "Ah, Nathan, you're awake. Good. I've been waiting for the chance to talk about sharing the tub. Mine broke months ago and fixing it costs a fortune." "Sharing? You're breaking into my house in the middle of the night?" She adjusted herself in the water, completely unfazed by my anger. "Don't be so dramatic. Neighbors share stuff. You barely use it during the day, and at night you're usually working. How do you even know when I'm working? I asked, realizing just how observant she was. Your office lights are always on. I can see them from my balcony. She said it as if it were the most natural thing. Besides, you look so lonely here. I figured you wouldn't mind. Get off my property now, or I'm calling the police, I insisted, clutching my phone. Diane sighed, getting out of the tub without any hurry or shame. You're overreacting, Nathan. This is what happens in communities. We share. Sharing isn't breaking in. Don't come back. As she slowly got dressed, her gaze changed. For a fleeting moment, I saw something cold and calculating behind that casual tone. You really should be more social, Nathan. Isolation isn't healthy for anyone. The next morning, I called a security company. Within 48 hours, they had cameras installed at all the strategic points around the property, an alarm system hooked directly to the monitoring center, and new locks on every door and window. I also went down to the local police station to file a report. Officer Thompson, a tired-looking guy with graying hair, listened to my account with clear skepticism. Look, Mr. Wells, I understand your concern, but this seems more like a misunderstanding between neighbors than a criminal case, he explained, scribbling some notes. Mrs. Reynolds is well known in the community and is very active in the homeowners association. She's invaded my property multiple times. I have video proof, I insisted, showing him the recordings on my phone. The officer watched with a neutral expression. I'll file the report, but honestly, I'd recommend talking directly to her first. Getting a restraining order is a complicated process for something like this. I left the station frustrated, but determined. That same day, I contacted a lawyer who started the process for a temporary restraining order. I also added motion sensor lights around the perimeter and bought a small safe for important documents, as well as a revolver that had been passed down from my dad. I never thought I'd need it, but the feeling of vulnerability was growing by the day. For a week, nothing happened. I started to wonder if my precautions had worked, if Diane had finally gotten the message. That hope lasted right until the following Sunday, when I was woken by the sound of the alarm blaring at 4 a.m. I rushed down the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs. The alarm was still echoing throughout the house while the app on my phone showed movement on the back deck. I turned on all the external and internal lights before peering out the kitchen window. The hot tub cover was off, but there was no one in sight. The security system had sent out a notification that the authorities were on their way. Cautiously, I approached the back door, trying to get a better look through the glass. That's when I noticed it. A small, shiny object inside the tub. 15 minutes later, Officer Thompson was inspecting what had been found. A delicate women's bracelet floating in the water. The kind of item someone would leave on purpose. It's hers, I said confidently. It's a provocation. The officer sighed, picking up the bracelet with a glove. Let's check the cameras, Mr. Wells. Maybe we have something more concrete this time. The footage was undeniable. Diane, dressed in dark clothes, had bypassed the initial motion sensors by going through the neighbor's garden and approaching from a blind spot. The system only triggered when she was already lifting the hot tub cover. When she heard the alarm, she tossed something into the water and quickly disappeared along the side of the house. This is enough proof, I insisted to Officer Thompson. She's clearly provoking me. I'm going to have a chat with Mrs. Reynolds myself, he replied, finally taking the situation seriously. And I strongly recommend you proceed with the restraining order. The next day, coming home from work, I found an unmarked envelope on my door. Inside was an old photo of my ex-wife taken from her social media, with her eyes slashed in red marker. On the back was a handwritten message. Lonely people shouldn't reject company. I called the police again. This time, Officer Thompson brought along a younger partner. They examined the envelope and found no usable fingerprints. They suggested I beef up my security and avoid any contact with Diane. She vehemently denied the previous accusations, explained Thompson. She claimed that her bracelet was probably lost during a friendly visit you had authorized weeks ago. That's completely false. I believe you, Mr. Wells, but we need ironclad evidence to move forward legally. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. The side window of the kitchen had been broken, with a stone wrapped in paper in the middle of the floor. The note simply read, "Difficult neighbors aren't welcome. Maybe it's time to move." The weeks that followed turned into a progressive nightmare. One morning, I found all my clothes on the back deck line cut into strips. On another day, I got home and noticed someone had rearranged things inside the house. Photos lying face down, drawers slightly ajar, books all shuffled around. Small changes that made me question my own sanity. The temporary restraining order was finally granted. but it only seemed to enrage Diane further. The morning after the official notification, I found my hot tub filled with a dark liquid, later identified as engine oil mixed with paint. The deck was vandalized with the word "selfish" painted in huge letters. I began meticulously documenting every incident. I installed additional cameras, even inside the house. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a baseball bat by the bedside. My refuge had turned into a fortified prison. The worst incident happened when I returned from a 2-day work trip. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit by a stench, a putrid, overwhelming smell. In every room, I found small pieces of raw meat hidden strategically, in shoes, behind books, at the back of drawers. The message was clear. She had been in there, searching every inch of my home, leaving her repulsive mark everywhere. The indoor cameras captured Diane and an unknown man entering through the back door, using what appeared to be a key. The man was skilled with locks. The police suspected he was a professional locksmith. They spent over an hour in my house, rifling through my belongings, opening letters, even trying on my clothes. The intimacy of the invasion made me physically ill. That night, while the professional cleaning team I hired worked to remove the stench, Officer Thompson showed up with news. "We have enough evidence to arrest her for trespassing and vandalism," he explained. "But you should know something disturbing. We found a similar pattern in your previous town. Diane Reynolds was investigated for stalking another single neighbor 3 years ago before she moved here. The charges were mysteriously dropped." The morning after hearing about Diane's history, I woke up with an oppressive feeling. It wasn't just about an intrusive neighbor anymore. I was dealing with someone potentially dangerous. I tried to contact the neighbor from the previous case, but found out he had moved to another state without leaving any contacts. My lawyer managed to get more details. Apparently, the guy had given up on his house after months of psychological torment, similar to what I was experiencing. The hearing to make the restraining order permanent was scheduled for 2 weeks from then. Meanwhile, the invasions continued, growing more sophisticated. Someone, presumably the guy from the camera footage, was managing to temporarily disable my security system during short intervals, creating gaps of vulnerability. On a Tuesday, I woke to find all the pictures on my desk replaced with magazine clippings showing gruesome domestic accidents. The next night, I found a handwritten letter on my pillow. "No one should sleep alone. I'm watching you breathe." Officer Thompson suggested I consider staying somewhere else until the hearing, but I refused. "If I leave, she wins. This is my house," I insisted. The police increased their patrols in the neighborhood, but Diane always seemed one step ahead. When confronted, she maintained a facade of perfect innocence, even expressing concern about my increasing paranoia to other neighbors. Slowly, I realized she was building an alternative narrative, the one of a newly divorced man having a mental breakdown, imagining persecutions. Some neighbors started looking at me with suspicion. The Homeowners Association, where Diane was an active member, sent out a letter expressing community concern over my baseless accusations against a respected resident. On one particularly hard night, after finding all the plants in my garden uprooted and tossed into the hot tub, I decided to install a hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector on the neighbor's tree, with his permission. This camera had a direct view of Diane's house. For 3 days, I watched her movements. She would leave every night around 10 p.m. and return hours later. On the 4th night, I finally saw them. Diane and the same man from the previous recordings were talking in her backyard. He handed over what looked like a set of tools. I zoomed in and froze. Among the objects, I recognized a gun. I immediately sent the video to Officer Thompson, who called me back urgently. "We're identifying the man in the footage. Apparently, he's Scott Wilson, a guy with a history of break-ins and assaults. We're watching them now, but I need you to beef up your security tonight. I'm sending a patrol car to keep an eye on your house." In the early hours, as the police car parked discreetly on the corner, I heard noises on the roof. Someone was trying to get in through the skylight in the upper hallway. I called emergency services while positioning myself in the room with the gun I'd taken out of the safe. The officers arrived within minutes, but found no one. The next morning, we discovered tool marks on the skylight and footprints on the roof. The intrusion had been cut short by the police presence, but the message was clear. They were upping the stakes. Officer Thompson finally got authorization to search Diane's house. They found plants from my residence, dozens of photos of me taken without my knowledge, including some through my windows while I slept. More disturbingly, they found a diary detailing our relationship, written as if we were a couple in the midst of a rough patch. "She's living in an alternate reality," explained the forensic psychiatrist consulted by the police. "In her mind, you two have this deep connection that you're denying. Every rejection fuels both her obsession and her anger. Despite the evidence, Diane was released after posting bail, under the condition that she wear an electronic ankle monitor and abide by the expanded restraining order. Scott Wilson, however, had vanished. I hired a private security guard to stay at the house during the day when I was at work. At night, I slept with the gun loaded on my bedside table. My lawyer sped up the hearing process, managing to move it up a week thanks to the new evidence. 2 days before the hearing, I received an anonymous call. A calm, methodical male voice said, "She's never gonna stop. Never. I know because I was targeted by her in Belo Horizonte too. I had to change states, change my name, and I still get nightmares. The only way out is for you to leave." It was the previous neighbor. Somehow he'd found out about my case. His words sent chills down my spine, but also steeled my resolve. "Why didn't you press charges all along?" I asked. "Because she poisoned my dog when I tried. Then she threatened my sister. Some people are just empty inside. There's no limit to what they'll do." On the eve of the hearing, during a heavy storm, the power went out across the whole block. My security system had a backup, but the external cameras were temporarily blinded by the pitch-dark and torrential rains. The clanging noise at the back door's lock woke me around 3 a.m. The storm was still raging outside, lashing the windows with pounding rain. The security system's backup had run out of battery after hours without power. The house was completely dark. I grabbed my revolver and moved silently through the hallway, slowly descending the stairs while avoiding those known creaky steps. In a flash of lightning, I saw 2 figures entering through the kitchen. A female silhouette I immediately recognized as Diane, and a larger, muscular man who was presumably Scott Wilson. I positioned myself behind the wall that separated the living room from the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it. The flashlight they carried briefly illuminated the area as they cautiously moved around. "He must be sleeping upstairs," Diane whispered. "Let's check to see if nobody else is here first." "Are you sure about that?" the man asked hesitantly. "What if he calls the police again?" "He won't get a chance," Diane replied with a disturbingly firm conviction. "After tonight, he'll understand that he can't reject me. We're meant to be together." A flash of lightning lit up the kitchen for a split second, and I saw Scott holding what looked like a large hunting knife. It wasn't a gun like I had suspected earlier, but it was just as lethal at close range. A cold bead of sweat trickled down my temple. Even though I had been practicing target shooting since my teens, I'd never pointed a gun at another person. My hand trembled slightly as I decided my next move. When they started making their way toward the stairs, I stepped out of my hiding spot, gripping the revolver firmly with both hands. "Don't move," I ordered, my voice surprisingly steady. "I already called the cops. They're on their way." Scott froze, but Diane took a step forward, her face partially lit by the flashlight she held. There was something in her expression that sent shivers down my spine, a mix of delight and fury, as if my resistance was both expected and intolerable. "Nathan, darling, we can finally have a proper talk," she said, as if we were meeting for a pre-planned dinner. "Put that ridiculous gun down. You know you're not going to shoot me. Stay where you are, Diane. I'm serious." My voice faltered a little, and I realized she had noticed. "See? You can't hurt me, because deep down, you know we belong together," she said, taking another step closer. "Stop!" I shouted, raising the gun. "One more move, and I shoot." Scott looked increasingly nervous, stepping slightly to the side. "Diane, this has gone too far. You said he'd be asleep, that we'd only scare him a little." "Shut up," she hissed, never taking her eyes off me. "Nathan's just confused. He'll understand once we really talk." At that moment, I heard sirens in the distance. Someone, maybe a neighbor who heard my shouts, had called the police. Diane's face twisted in anger. "You called them? You called them?" Her voice shot up several octaves, nearly unrecognizable. "After everything I've done to bring us together?" Scott began to back toward the door, but Diane grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Don't you dare abandon me now. Do something." I could see the exact moment when Scott made his decision, the fear of Diane momentarily getting the better of him. He lunged toward me with the knife raised. Time seemed to slow down. I pointed near his feet and pulled the trigger. The gunshot reverberated through the house, echoing off the walls. The bullet ricocheted off the wooden floor, shattering a piece near Scott's foot as he jumped back, dropping the knife. "The next shot will be for your knee," I stated with a clarity I didn't know I possessed at that moment. "On the floor, both of you, now." Scott immediately complied, dropping to the ground with his hands behind his back. Diane, however, stayed standing, her face a bizarre mix of disillusionment and rage. "You actually fired," she murmured, as if that were the ultimate betrayal. "You really chose to reject him, to reject us." It wasn't until the police car's lights flooded the room through the windows that I realized Diane wasn't just talking about the two of us. Her free hand rested protectively over her stomach. A chill ran down my spine. "Our baby," she whispered, even though it was impossible. We'd never even been close. "Our future. You're destroying everything." The doors were violently kicked in as 3 police officers stormed the house, guns drawn. Officer Thompson led them, his face hardening when he saw the scene before him. Scott on the ground, Diane still standing, and me with a trembling weapon in hand. "Lower your weapons slowly, Mr. Wells," Thompson instructed calmly. "It's all okay now." I complied, feeling an overwhelming exhaustion wash over me. While the officers handcuffed Scott, Diane stood still, staring at me as if we were still alone in the room. "It's not over, Nathan," she said softly, as an officer finally led her out. "You'll miss me. You'll realize your mistake." I sank down heavily onto the couch as Officer Thompson checked me for injuries. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving me trembling and nauseous. "It's over," Thompson assured me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "This time we have everything. Flagrantly trespassing, threatening with a knife, and breaking a court order. She's not going to get away easily." That night, I gave my detailed statement at the station. Hours dragged by as I recounted every incident of the past few months. When I finally returned home, escorted by a patrol car, the sun was starting to rise. The storm had passed, leaving the sky clear and eerily calm. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to get more stories like this. The trial for Diane and Scott took place 3 months later. During that time, I lived temporarily in a rented apartment, only visiting my house during the day to supervise repairs. Every corner that Diane had touched needed to be cleaned, fixed, or replaced before I could start over. In court, I sat in silence while the prosecution presented evidence after evidence. The obsessive diaries, the photos, the security camera logs. The most impactful testimony came from Diane's previous neighbor, who finally found the courage to share his experience. His account revealed a disturbing pattern that had spanned years. Diane's defense tried to argue mental instability, presenting a series of psychiatric diagnoses. However, forensic experts confirmed that while she suffered from severe personality disorders, she was fully aware that her actions were illegal. When the judge announced the sentence, 5 years in prison without the possibility of early parole for Diane, 2.5 years for Scott with the possibility of parole after 1 year, I felt such a deep sense of relief that I had to steady myself on the bench in front of me. "Mr. Wells," the judge said before adjourning the session, "the court deeply regrets that the system took so long to protect you properly. We hope you can rebuild your life and regain your sense of security." In the following weeks, I hired a landscaping company to completely redesign the back deck. The hot tub, the epicenter of the nightmare, was replaced with a new one, installed in a different spot. It was an important symbol. Not only was I cleaning up the past, but also reshaping my space for a fresh start. The neighbors, many of whom had doubted me at first, now came over with genuine offers of help. Some even admitted that they'd noticed Diane's odd behavior, but never imagined the extent of her obsession. Gradually, I built real connections with some of the families in the community, not out of social pressure, but by choice. Officer Thompson even kept checking in on me, even after he was transferred to another district. On one of his visits, months after the trial, we shared a cup of coffee on the newly renovated deck. "You know what impresses me?" he said, watching the changes on the property. "How you chose to stay. Most people would have sold the house and moved as far away as possible." I considered his words as I watched the steam rise from the surface of the new hot tub. For a while, I thought about selling, but I realized it would just be another way of letting her control my life. This house was my fresh start before her, and now it represents my refusal to be pushed away from what's mine. At night, after all the visitors were gone, I created a new ritual. Before getting into the hot tub, I would carefully inspect every inch of the house, not out of paranoid fear, but as a reminder that I was finally in control of my space. The nightmares still came from time to time. I'd wake up sweating, swearing I'd heard footsteps on the roof or the metallic sound of someone fiddling with a lock. But every time it happened, I'd get up, check the security feeds on my phone, and convince myself that I was safe. 6 months after the trial, I received an official letter from Diane's lawyer. She had tried to appeal her sentence, but the appeal was denied. Attached to the legal notice was a handwritten note that the lawyer said he had been instructed to deliver. though he warned that I wasn't obligated to read it. For a moment, I considered burning it without opening. In the end, I decided to face her words one last time. The note was short, written in the same neat handwriting I had come to fear. When I'm out, you'll be waiting. You know we're inevitable. Instead of feeling fear, I just felt deep pity. I put the note back in the envelope and handed it over to my lawyer for documentation. That very night, I stepped into the hot tub at sunset, letting the warm water envelop me as I watched the first stars appear in the sky. The water bubbled gently around me, and for the first time in a long while, the sound didn't bring back memories of invasion and violation. It was just water, comforting, relaxing, mine. I closed my eyes and submerged until only my face was above the surface. My house was mine again. My life was mine again. And even though I knew constant vigilance would be a part of my routine for the next few years, that didn't mean fear had to define my existence. The next morning, while making my coffee, I looked out the kitchen window at the newly planted garden. The first spring flowers were starting to bloom, adding color to a space that had been the stage for so much trauma. I smiled, realizing that, finally, I was seeing my property as a home again, not as a battlefield. 5 years is a long time. Long enough to heal, to rebuild, to strengthen. Long enough to be ready, if need be. But also long enough to rediscover the joy of living without constant fear. That's what I chose to focus on now. Not the 5 years until Diane might be released, but the 5 years I had to relearn how to live fully. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to get more stories like this.